Welcome back to another episode of Lush Life, No Labels, a podcast where I talk about the struggles and joys of self-improvement, anywhere from relationships, career, wellness, and more. I'm Fatu, and I have a very special guest joining me today. My special guest today is Doris. Doris is a Kenyan woman. She is 29 years old and enjoys traveling, meeting new people, being active, such as doing yoga and tennis, and learning, sharing, and practicing different professional improvement tips. She definitely gives me a lot of great tips as well. And she does this through avenues like reading, listening to podcasts, and networking. And fun fact, Doris and I know each other from high school. And for my old listeners, you guys, I've talked a little bit about my high school. It's a boarding school. And for a long time, we were actually based in the same city. We were actually roommates for a few years as well. But last year, Doris moved across the country with her cat, my nephew Tika. So during this episode, we'll talk about her recent move, what spurred it, and the adjustment to a new city, both for her and her cat. So, welcome to this podcast, Doris. Hello.
Hi, thank you, Fatu. Super excited to be here.
Yes, thank you for joining me. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Like I said, really excited to be here. Excited to dive into this conversation. How are
Fabulous.
you doing?
I'm good. I had a long day at work today, but what day isn't, right?
Yeah, fair.
So, before we jump into the main discussion, I always like to share a story of the week for the listeners. Doris, do you have a story of the week you'd like to share with us?
Ooh, that is a great question. I don't necessarily have a story of the week, but I guess I have like an anecdote that I wanted to share.
Yeah, no, that's the story of the week.
I was reading this Substack article, which I'm very into Substack and actually considering starting to blog there myself. Shameless plug. That'll neither here nor there. So I was reading this really great article, and it was essentially just about the power of choices. And one thing that really stuck out to me in that article is they talked about just how positive choices can compound, so can negative choices. So for example, being in the city where you're not meant to be can compound into, negative time away from the city where you're meant to be. So that definitely it was a recent article that I read, but I think pertinent to what we'll talk about, and definitely added another layer to my mindset around, the power of choices. And while I am a big believer in it's never too late and better late than never, I think just having the angle of like the compound negative relative to the compound positive was a new one. So that was maybe a big start to our episode, but hopefully it'll all fit in.
That's a great anecdote. And I can definitely agree with that sentiment that of at least in terms of the compounding of either the negative or the positive, I can definitely see that being a real true thing. So one thing that stood out to me, sort of what you're saying as well, and thinking about your background, is that you have lived in many different places just in your life, right? And you've lived in different countries, different states, different cities. And so mentioned at the top of this episode that you recently moved across the country. I'm curious, I'm trying to like tie it back to this article that you read. Do you think that where you were living before, there were negative, I guess, events that were compounding that maybe led to your change?
No, not necessarily from that lens. I
Hmm.
think more so from the lens of maybe if I'd moved sooner, I would have been earlier on the trajectory that I am now, or like
Hmm.
the larger alignment that I feel with my geographic hub, if that
Hmm.
makes sense. So no, not necessarily that there was even a negative experience, which I think is kind of speaks to that quote, which Like sometimes we want to have that negative experience to spur us to change, or sometimes we think like,
Mm,
oh, it'll happen when it happens.
hmm.
But sometimes even just like not being where you're meant to be, that is like the compounding negative element, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. Like you're
That
missing out on where you could be more aligned.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So, given that you recently moved from just me knowing you, I know that you lived in a certain area for a long time and sort of spent most of your life there. I'm curious what sparked your move across the country? Because, some people you might move to another part of your city, you might move to another part of the state, but it's not often that people move across the country. So I'm very curious as to what led to that or what some of the reasons were that you chose the city that you live in right now.
Yeah, that's actually a really great question. And I'll preface with saying that before I moved, I lived in the same apartment in the same part of town for like 5, 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
So all that to say, I'm very much a creature of habit,
Mm-hmm.
and given the opportunity, definitely appreciate being able to have that experience as well. But also on the other side of the coin, I think having lived in that city for as long as I had, both in terms of like post grad and also I'd grown up in that city, or at least like in the suburbs and general vicinity, it definitely made me want to, if I was gonna like uproot my life and pack up all 5 years worth of things in my apartment, definitely wanted it to be for a change that was radical and not in a negative way, but just in a way that would actually force me to grow out of my comfort zone, and actually have like newer challenges that, for example, moving to a different city in the same or a different town in the same vicinity
Mm-hmm.
would have provided.
Okay.
Yeah, I think honestly, my move just kind of came together serendipitously,
Mm-hmm.
which I also took as another green light slash green flag in the whole process. Like the chips just kind of fell into place. I wouldn't say I did extensive research, and I, don't necessarily do this, but just for me, I didn't necessarily do extensive research, but I did go into it with the mindset of, if it's a year or two, I can always try it out, and can always move back to my hometown and home city. And from early on, I definitely removed ego from that decision. So that also gave me a sense of comfort going into it, just knowing that if I do absolutely hate it, it's not something that has to be permanent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, I think that, like I said, it gave me a lot of comfort going into the move. And thankfully, I haven't had that thought in a while. So I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's definitely a good thing. And I think for a lot of us I'm also somebody who has lived on different continents and have lived in different states and all of that. And it's interesting for sure. You were saying that you didn't do extensive research, and I don't know that a lot of us do extensive research. Sometimes, even when I've been moving all the time, but when I move from one part of the city to another part of the city, people always say, oh, you should yes, go see the place that you're interested in living in, but actually you should also drive by at night, just different times of the day, just to see, how is the neighborhood? What's the traffic like? What's the sound like? And I don't think enough of us do that. I mean, to me, that's very thorough. And I certainly don't do thorough research like that, even if it's in the same city. But like you said, I don't even think that if we have the desire to move, I don't think you need to do all of the research per se. Obviously, you should research the area and, all of that, safety, etc. Is there a grocery store next to you? The basic things. But I feel like part of the fun of moving to a new place is being able to discover the new place. For me, I'm like, now
Totally.
there are all these new restaurants. I like to eat. So, like, now there are all these new restaurants I can try in my own little neighborhood. Now there's all these trails I can walk. So, for me, I enjoy actually moving because it gives me another environment to explore, even if it's still in the same city. I wonder, is that something that you felt since moving? Like, now you have all of these new things to discover?
Yes, definitely. And actually, just one last thing to add to that thread that you were on. I feel like that's definitely one of the gifts of having like a level of flexibility and being a certain age. And I definitely would encourage anyone who has that to fully lean into it. Like you said, that's like the fun of it. But I think like as you start to think about like buying a home and, maybe if you have kids, definitely got to do a little bit more due diligence. But I think it is definitely like a privilege. And I 100% encourage anyone who has the flexibility to just like get up and move to do it. Because, like you said, the fun of it is finding out what's there and exploring like your new neighborhood.
Mhm.
And yeah, that's definitely been a huge part of it. I actually moved into my apartment like without ever seeing it. I just did a virtual tour.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Girl,
Yeah.
all right, all right.
Yeah.
Don't
So
they always say, you should have like a drive-by or like a something?
I know. And you were
Because what
saying
if you were, one
like,
time, actually, now I'm going to go on a little tangent. One time when I was in college and I was moving to whatever the city was that I was moving to,
yeah,
Boston, I almost got scammed for something like that because they were like, oh, this is what the apartment is. You just have to do a deposit. And it just seemed too good to be true. And it was. It ended up being a scam, but sometimes they'd be scamming you. I'm glad that it worked out for you though.
no, thankfully it worked out. I like my apartment. I re-signed my lease, so I guess that is a good
That's
sign.
a good sign.
But I will say, like, a year lease goes by really fast. I'm sure
Mhm.
everyone on this call can, or not on this call, but everyone listening can attest to that. So that was also another thing that gave me comfort. Just
Mhm.
like having being in my late 20s and having gone through the living alone dance for a few years, you definitely realize just how fast that lease goes. And even if it's terrible, you can, for the most part, manage and plan to make your exit.
Yeah, which is
Once,
great. I know so I have international listeners and
oh, like,
oh, yes, yes. But in other countries, I know, for example, in Korea, well, everybody's having a housing crisis globally, to be fair. But there used to be something where you would pay, I believe, more than a year. There's something where you pay a 2-year lease or 3-year lease, something like that, right
yeah,
up front, and it locks you in. So I do agree that sometimes if you're too locked in and you end up not liking the place, then it's much harder. Even in the US, I've mostly signed 1-year leases, but I do have experience as well staying in places where it's month to month and you're not stuck in a lease and
yeah,
you can sort
true.
of leave whenever. But I'm glad that you enjoy your current place and that you have renewed your lease. I will say that you don't live alone. You have a roomie. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your roomie? This is
Yeah,
my roomie as well in the past.
yeah, yes, yes. My broke roommate, but he's rich in other ways.
He's I was gonna say, don't be calling him broke.
Yes, I have a cat, Tika,
Yes, my nephew.
who also made the transition with me. And yeah, it's been really good so far. I think that's been also another really comforting aspect is how well he's adjusted. He's like a little jet setting cat these days, going between cities.
Yeah, that's true. He is a jet setter. I love that. How has he adjusted to being in, I guess, a different environment, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. This is, for example, I've always had roommates, so he's always been used to being around people. So this is probably the most time it's been just him and I.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I could telepathize him.
Yeah, I guess we don't know what
But
he's thinking.
yeah, but overall, I do think he's adjusted really well. He's a cat who's pretty like, he likes his quiet time, he likes peace.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it fits his vibe. And we have a nice fifth floor balcony that he gets to go up
I know
And
that's right.
oh, he loves it. He goes there by himself and just like perches. He's a very independent king these days. This might seem like a reach, but I think it made him more resilient, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, you know
He's
him the best. You
yeah.
know, it's not a reach per se. Now I kind of want to talk a little bit about you being a pet owner because you and Tika have been together for a long time.
Mhm.
And like I said, obviously I used to live with you guys, so I have interacted and I know a lot of people with cats now. Before, right, everybody used to have a dog and then there was all this propaganda against kitties and
Yeah.
how they are and how standoffish they are, et cetera, et cetera. And now I've had obviously you and Tika, but also there's other cats. So my perspective has certainly changed. But I'm curious, you just said he's resilient and you understand him, right? So as a cat owner, how is the dynamic between you and your cat like on a day-to-day basis? Because as I understand it, they like to have their own space more. They're not like dogs where they're just gonna come if you call, right?
Yeah.
So how is that, or do you feel like a cat was the right type of pet for your personality?
Oh, wow. That's a really interesting question. That's actually a really great question. I'll
Tell me
start
if
with
you were.
the, yeah, good question. I'll start with the second question because I think that is definitely like a big consideration that people should account for. I was talking to someone who's a dog owner and she was really shocked to learn that cats don't have to go outside and be let out and, go on walks. And she said, if I knew that, I would have also considered a cat sooner because she doesn't like the walking and the going outside part of
Mhm.
being a dog owner.
Yeah.
And granted, that's a pretty straightforward example, but I think it can definitely be a lot more nuanced as to like the type of breed you get. A lot of people don't know this, but cats have personalities based on their coat color. So that is also a
Oh.
factor. All things considered, I will say that I think Tika was definitely the right pet for me.
Hmm.
And also, if I think about my lifestyle, for example, I do travel for work, so I'm able to go on short trips, and it's less of a hassle to have someone check on him once or twice a day versus having someone have to walk him and do a more extensive routine. And I've also been able to travel with him. So even after moving, I went back to visit my family with him, and he was just in a carrier. And granted, this is also another, like, for example, if you get a big dog versus a small dog, you can travel with. Big dog, not as
Hmm.
much.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I definitely encourage people to think pretty granularly about your pet matching your personality. But all that to say, I think Tika definitely matches my lifestyle and personality. And yeah, I'm glad that you asked me that.
Of course.
What was the first question by me?
Oh, the first one I think was just about pet ownership.
Oh, day to day life.
Yeah, yeah. Like, what is it like just to have a pet? And I understand the different breeds, so you can obviously speak to the perspective of having a cat.
Yeah. I would say having a cat is, at least for me personally, is like having it's like a living labubu, if you will.
A Labubu. Do you have
Yeah.
one of those?
No, I do not have one of those,
Yeah.
but I think just having like a living, adorable creature
Hmm.
absolutely improves your quality of life.
Hmm.
Sometimes I'll pick him up and he'll do like a deep sigh.
Like,
And
girl, please. I was.
yeah, it's just so cute that he's like a sentient being.
Mhm.
And cats
And
and
they're hunters. I love that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And he's pretty smart. He knows my routine. The funniest thing he does is when he sees me bring out my suitcase for a work trip, he will start to hide because
Oh.
he thinks I might take him to Boston with me. That was what we did over the holidays. But yeah,
I
they're
remember.
very smart, and it's also cute to see them like pick up on your routine
Yeah.
and start to like adapt to it. Slash, sometimes they even change your routine, but for the most part, I think cats especially do a good job of fitting into routines.
Yeah, I remember some of the times when I would watch him when we used to live together. And it was always interesting seeing the way you and him interacted, just as the way you interacted. But then when it was just me and him, yeah, I would just notice different things about him, and I'm like, oh wow, like yeah, like you said, they're very smart. They understand things, but they're also very, if I don't want to be bothered, don't bother me, and I love that. They have boundaries, and I appreciate that about cats. And I'm not a pet owner. I grew up with sheep and chickens back in my day, but I think I've mentioned this, but I would get if I got a pet, which I probably will in the future, it would definitely be a cat because I think I'm a cat personally. I believe I have a lot of things in common with them. They like their personal space. If they don't want to, sometimes they want to cuddle with you, and sometimes they're like, leave me alone. I love that. They're able to let you know. The fact that you mentioned the one girl that you know, one of my big things about not getting a dog is that I live in Boston and it's cold here, and I
Yeah.
don't like that. So I
Yeah.
don't want to have to take my dog out because we're both going to cry at that point, and I don't want to deal with it. I also have a name for my future cat already.
Yeah. Yes, yes.
Yes. For the listener, yes, crouton, like
Yeah,
those things in the salad. Yeah, so my cat's name is going to be Crouton. I think my one of the biggest, well, I should say the biggest reason I haven't gotten a cat right now is because I travel a lot, and I will travel for a week, sometimes 2 weeks, and so I would feel bad leaving my kitty alone. I guess I could bring my cat could be a traveling cat. So we would travel together, and then I would get one of those cat backpacks, and then my cat could see the world as we walk together because I also go on hiking trips, and it would be fun for my cat to go with me. So
Yeah, totally.
I think I'd have to like I'd have to train my cat in a way and figure out how we can do this. Also, Loki, I might want to take my cat on little walks.
Yeah.
I've already extensively thought about what I would do if I had a cat. I just haven't taken the plunge yet for it. But
Yeah,
listeners and Doris, stay tuned because Crouton will be arriving soon enough.
I know. Tika is ready to meet his cousin. So,
Yes. I love that.
but yeah, I would recommend. I mean, you could always, in the short term, like foster a cat. Uh,
Yes, I've been
like,
looking into, or even volunteering at the animal shelter I was in it also, like on the weekends.
agreed. And I
Yeah.
think like also Boston has a good MSPCA.
Oh, yes, they
Maybe
do.
being around different cats and getting
Mhm.
a sense of their energy,
For that.
um, that might be helpful for you in your research as well.
Thank you for that. I would like to ask you a little bit more about your recent move and how that has affected some of the hobbies that you've done and also some of your professional career aspects as well. Do you have any other tips that you'd like to give for folks in terms of pet ownership?
Say don't overthink it. Pet ownership is like a lifelong journey. And just as much as you will be getting to know your pet, they will be getting to know you. So I definitely would say don't overthink it. If anything, back to compounding negative.
Ooh.
The longer you're away from your cat, this is time you guys could be getting to know each other. So,
And life is about those types of experiences and connections. So I agree. Yes, bringing us back to the story of the week. I love it.
yes. But yeah, definitely important as well to make sure that the timing is right.
Mhm. Agreed, agreed. So yeah, like I said, Doris slash the listener, stay tuned for Fatu and Crouton coming up soon enough.
The names even like sound good together.
Right? We'd be
Oh,
best friends forever. So we've talked about your move, we've talked about your pet, which is absolutely fabulous. I do want to touch a little bit on some of the other aspects of your life, specifically in terms of career and some of the hobbies that you've been doing. I know that the current job that you do, you're really enjoying, and it's a bit different from some of the other things that you've done before. Has your move impacted the way that you view your career or future professionalism?
yeah, I'm glad you asked that, Fatu. If anything, I would say maybe the opposite, which is that my career affected more how I think of myself generally and in terms of moving and flexibility.
Mhm.
Now I'll zoom out slash step back and preface with saying that I was in the job market for about 8 months in 2023 and early 2024. And definitely was a period of a lot of reflection, but also I think definitely made me realize that although it was not an easy process, there were certain things I could use to my advantage. Like, for example, having the flexibility to be able to move somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Or, for example, I could, while salary is important and definitely
Yeah, you got to
big
pay those
factor.
bills for you and your cat. You got to pay
Yeah,
the bills for you and your cat. Yeah.
no, exactly, exactly. But I think at the same time, like I had more flexibility versus someone who like has kids and someone who has to have this like set amount. Otherwise, they literally it's not sustainable for their livelihood. So yeah, so I think it definitely made me pause and think about like the balance in that sense. And also, in this time I was doing a lot of like self discovery and trying to lean into self improvement resources. And one of the books that I read that I definitely recommend, The Defining Decade. I forget the author's name, but a really great book. One of the tenets that they talk about is, when you're in this flexible zone, putting yourself kind of like in the best situation, the best city, whether that's economically or socially or just for like, or culturally. I think really like leaning into the flexibility that your 20s can provide.
Mhm.
So yeah, all that to say, during that period, it definitely that taught me to think of that as a strength and also taught me to see myself a little bit more independently and as someone who has the ability to figure it out as I go along. I mean, I've always known that about myself, but it reinforced it for sure. So yeah, that was a long answer to your question, but I would say the opposite, which
Okay.
is my career journey influenced my moving more than the opposite.
And that makes sense, right? It doesn't need to be one way or the other, but I think it's
Yeah.
great. And I know you've been enjoying the career and really seeing where it goes. Do you have an anticipation of where it could go now that you're sort of settling into that?
I do not, but I think that's kind of the fun of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely have goals for myself, and I appreciate that I'm in an industry where I feel more settled and see like clear paths for growth in the next like 5, 10, 20 years.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think I try to keep an open mind. I definitely have like dream titles, as we all do.
I love.
But at the same time, I think like the balance of a career is that quote about opportunity and luck, or sorry, luck is when opportunity meets preparation. So
Woo!
preparing for that next step and knowing that there's more. Also, I'm someone who understands the value of timing and how that can make or break an experience. So I try to think about that part too. Definitely happy to be in a place where I can like foresee different paths for myself and have examples. And I will say as well, like while we can't necessarily forecast things, leaning into the preparation part of it, or it's easy to overlook. For example, if you have a dream role in mind, you're not necessarily thinking about that if you're in your day to day, like in a different role.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely encourage people to like keep that at the forefront. And whether it's like informational interviews or just keeping an eye on companies that you are particularly interested in, learning about those companies, upskilling. I think there's a lot that you can do to better position yourself. So that way, when the opportunity does come, you are more prepared than if you were just like passively waiting. Unfortunately, it can be easy to just find yourself in being like a more passive participant in your own career. And this is something I was definitely guilty of, especially right out of college when, for example, it was a better job market and you could just easy apply somewhere, or if you were recruited somewhere out of college. You don't necessarily pause and think about how it fits into the big picture. So definitely recommend having more of those pause moments and just thinking about how it all fits together, because ultimately a career is bigger than just one job that you'll do at a certain point in time.
I know that's right. I love that. A career is definitely bigger than the one company that you work at. And thank you so much, Doris, for providing that advice because I agree. I love what you said about informational interviews. I do that. I'm literally about to have some this week. I literally find the people who are in the group or the whatever that I'm interested in talking to. And I just message them and say, hey, I'm me. I do this currently, but I'm really interested in XYZ and give them a little bit of context. If you are open, can I set up some time to chat with you about this? It's very simple. It's very non-committal for them. They can just not respond. That it does provide you at least the avenue to be able to talk to somebody who's in the role, right? You can just talk to them about what they do, and you never know what comes out of that. Because I've
Yeah.
done those, and it's come out of somebody then actually tapping me for a future rotation because they remembered that their colleague had talked to me about my interest in that. And then, so I definitely agree with just keeping up to date on some of those things, at least if you know where you want to go. Some people, some of the listeners may be like me, where I have a lot of interests. I don't really have I want to be the CEO of blah, 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 or the director of blah, blah, blah. I just have these different things that I'm interested in doing. And that's still the same thing. You can still have these different networking touch points and figure out how to connect with people. And I'm definitely going to have a future episode actually just dedicated to LinkedIn, which I coin the Facebook of professionalism, because even though I've been a past hater of LinkedIn, you guys have probably heard me talk about it. It's not all bad in the sense I do think that you can make it work for you without feeling too overwhelmed with it. But I use certain phrases and things when I reach out to people that have been successful for me. So it would definitely be interesting to dive more into that. But Doris, thank you for that advice on the career aspect of things. And I want to take it a little bit back to the beginning of this episode and back to the story of the week, actually, that you sort of mentioned about compounding positives or compounding negatives around the fact that you recently moved. And I know there's been a lot of really great positives. And one of the positives has been your hobbies. And I know there has been some hobbies that you've actually transferred over to your new city, but also some new hobbies. And I'm curious, how did you navigate finding new hobbies or new friends in your city? Because as an adult, that's hard to do.
Yeah. No, it definitely is. I would say the two were definitely hand in hand. Hobbies are a great way to meet people, especially in a new city. So, for example, actually, a piece of advice that I saw right around the time I moved was like if you pick a hobby and just go consistently to the same like lesson, the same class, eventually you'll start, running into the same people, seeing familiar faces, and that is the foundation of a friendship, if you will. You already have one thing in common at least. So yeah, I would say that's definitely been my experience, just kind of showing up. One thing I will say is that Dallas is definitely a pretty like friendly and open city, which I really appreciate, and I think it really fits into just my life view and approach to meeting people. I think because there's a lot of transplants and people who are new to the area, there's always events, there's always meetups, there's always hobby based activities that people are organizing. So that's been really enriching. And yeah, I think hobbies have been probably the best way for me to meet friends, and they give you a chance to really get a vibe of the person, and like I said, you have at least some things in common before taking that next step forward.
Yeah, I that's a great point. And I've talked on this podcast previously about how as adults or the older we get, it is more difficult to make adult friends because I guess most of us are definitely set in our own ways and it's harder to make friends because one, you have to really make like you said, when you have more touch points with people, it's easier to make friends. But to get to that point, you have to make the effort to show up at least a few times, or you have to make the effort, even if you're not in a sort of hobby class together, you still have to make an effort to show up to the meetups that you plan with your potential friends. And it can
Yeah.
be difficult because sometimes you're tired and you're like, oh, I don't want to go to this. And it's easy to say no or cancel the plan that you already have. But the issue then becomes that you don't have at least a big established time with those people enough to say no enough. Despite the fact that it's hard to make friends, it can still be easy. And hobbies are one of the great ways, like you've mentioned, to make those types of connections because you do have at least one thing that is connecting you, that hobby, and seeing each other more and more on a week. Maybe you do your hobby once a week, maybe twice a week. That's still 4 times that you're meeting with them. And
Yeah,
I believe
true.
that's a really great way to continue with those connections, especially if you find that there's somebody there that you click with.
Those are all very, very good points. Definitely agree fully, especially the importance of showing up early on.
Mm.
Yeah, gotta build up some credibility before you can start canceling willy-nilly. And
Yeah,
not listen.
right. I'm
So
guilty of that. That's why I mention it. And because I'm an introvert and I guess I'm an extrovert sometimes, but mostly an introvert. So I understand that the day of when you have the plans, it's
yeah.
hard. You're like, maybe I could cancel this. But you
Yeah.
gotta just make yourself do it because canceling it now, that's like one less time for you to meet with that person who you barely know. And you cancel enough times and it's over and done with because again, you don't have a relationship with that person. Sometimes as an introvert, you do need to drag your feet, but I find that even when I do and I have the interaction, it's a great one. And
Yeah,
I
agreed.
appreciate the fact that I did it. You just have to, as adults especially, I do think we have to put ourselves out there more, especially after COVID. Our world is so much more different than adults used to have it before COVID. People are much more closed off. People are much less likely to want to socialize in person. So I do think it's even more difficult for us than it was before the pandemic.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. And I definitely do not claim to be perfect, and still working at it. But yeah, I think that's a great point and a good reminder. Like especially early on, it makes a lot more of a difference in when you're trying to build a relationship.
So, Doris, you've given us a lot of advice today. You've talked a lot about your life and what has been going on with you recently. As we wrap up this episode, I'm curious, do you have any questions that you'd like the listener to think about for their own personal lives as they listen to this episode?
Bringing it back to the opening anecdote of compounding, time compounding, both negatively and positively.
Mm-hmm.
I would encourage listeners to think about the instances where they are dedicating time and effort towards a choice or decision that, while it may not be explicitly negative, it is keeping them from a more positive compounding. And the sooner you start positively compounding, I'm not, math is not my strong suit, but I'm pretty sure
Well,
gotta get to it, or it's better to get to it
hmm
sooner rather than later. So it doesn't always manifest with like a negative experience, but just the fact of being away from that more positive compounding is in and of itself a consequence. So I would encourage people to think about those instances, whether it's personally, professionally, even with hobbies. I think if you're just doing something for this because you've always done it,
hmm
but there's something else that you're more interested in trying. No. What if what you're sticking to is keeping you from that more positively compounding experience? So yeah, and I'll share with Fatu the article that I'm talking about in case anyone wants to read it further. But that would be my question of the episode.
Yes, and I'll definitely put the link to that in the description as well. It's been great having you on this pod today, Doris. Thank you so much for all of the insights and all of the adventures that you've walked through with us today. And to the listener, thank you again for listening to another episode of Lush Life No Labels. Like and subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Cheers to your lush life, and see you later.